feel like I just had to make one of the hard decisions in my time as an author, and I just changed all of the covers on my first epic fantasy series, the Snakesblood Saga. I drew the original covers. I loved those covers so much, but so much has changed in the past few years since I put those books out and since I drew the covers. And I spent probably 6 months trying to decide what to do with that series before I decided it was time to try and change the covers and see if that helps increase book sales. So the original covers were illustrated by me, and this is book 1, and I still absolutely love this cover. I feel like it's a fairly good representation of the mood of the first book, of the series to come. There's the bit of mystery. It makes it clear that the series is largely female-led. It's just altogether very much what I wanted. The problem is what I want versus what everybody else wants sometimes don't align. And one of the hard things about authorship is being able to swallow your pride and get over your own personal taste and do what is best for your work. So I don't think I'm the most incredible illustrator ever, but I put a lot of effort into the series. And overall, people really liked them, but the people who really liked them were also the people who got to see the creation process. So they are the ones who were along for the ride and saw me creating this cover from scratch. They saw me bringing my own vision to life. And so it meant a lot to them because that was something that they got to experience too. And back when I started working toward getting this series published, I decided to take the indie route in 2019, so that was when I started all the drawings and everything. Back then, there still were quite a few epic fantasy covers that had people like this illustrated on the covers. So at the time, that worked very well. But the market changes very quickly, and as the market has changed, the sales for this series has continued to drop, because I quickly ran into the problem that the message the covers were sending about the books did not align with the content of the books according to current trends. So if you look in YA fantasy, you still see a lot of the illustrated covers like that, and that's great, and that's good news for me because I am keeping Spectrum Legacy with illustrated covers, and it is a little bit more of a YA-leaning epic fantasy series. But Snakesblood Saga is definitely an adult fantasy series with characters who are, graduates from college and people taking over kingdoms. And the tone is just overall a little bit more mature. So with the illustrated covers on it, people are like, oh, well, this looks like a great YA fantasy book. Unfortunately, that's not what it is. I took a look at the reports on fantasy, and in particular romantic fantasy, because Snakesblood Saga has a very strong romantic undertone to the story. The relationship between Rune and Thrall is a very integral part of that story. And I kind of got the feeling that both of those genres were going that direction, but looking at K-Lytic's reports really helped cement to me that the way epic fantasy, and in particular romantic fantasy, were going was a more iconographic or text-based cover. And in fact, when I went to look at the covers this morning for the top 100 on Amazon, and in epic fantasy, it was, I think, 8 out of every 10 books that were in the epic fantasy category were books that either were icon-based, like symbol-based, or they were text-based covers. And it was even stronger in romantic fantasy, where the icon-based covers and text-based covers were 9 out of 10 covers, and the ones that were not icon or text-based actually were paranormal books that didn't belong in the fantasy category and had been misplaced for some reason. So a lot of people hear that and they go, oh, well, then you should keep your cover the same, because if it's different, it'll stand out. And the problem is when your cover stands out and is so radically different, when it is the one that is different in a collection of 10 different books in that genre, then people aren't going to look at it and be drawn to that one because it's eye-catchingly different. They're going to glance at it and then say, oh, this book is on the wrong shelf. And of course, anytime you look at cover trends, it's always the indie authors who are leading the way because they are the ones who can quickly pivot. And even when you're walking through Barnes & Noble and you're looking at traditionally published books, a lot of the books that previously had illustrated covers, like The Witcher, have now rebranded to symbol-based covers. So if even traditional publishing, which moves at a snail's pace compared to the indies, has gone to the icon and symbol-based and the text-based covers, it's a really good indicator that that's kind of here to stay. And it meant it was time to really strongly reevaluate my covers. And that hurts me so deeply because honestly, I don't think I will ever love any covers as much as what I did for the original releases, because I poured so much effort into those and I spent so much time getting those covers just the way I wanted. They were projects that taught me so much. I remember that when I was doing For All's dress on the front, I was having a lot of trouble getting the light on the dress to look right. And I ended up getting feedback from the person who now does the covers for Spectrum Legacy, and that meant so much to me because I had always so greatly admired her artwork. And getting that feedback and having somebody that much more skilled than me take the time to give me feedback, that it meant a lot sentimentally as well. So uploading the new covers and wiping this away from the ebooks at least really stung this morning, and I'm still kind of dealing with that. It is only for the ebook versions though. I use Ingram for printing most of my paperbacks. And whenever you upload a new cover to Ingram, it's $49 per cover, so to recover the entire series would be $300, and I am not ready to spend that much on what is currently an experiment to see if new covers perform better. So for now, the paperbacks are still the original ones, and that means that people who started buying the series in paperback will have plenty of time to go ahead and get them in the original cover format. It's just the ebooks that are changing for now. It is possible for me to keep the old covers available by selling them exclusively through Ingram and then updating the new covers to be available as paperback through KDP. And that's something that I'll consider if it feels like the new covers are being more successful. Because honestly, I don't sell a lot of paperbacks wide. Almost all of my paperbacks go through Amazon, but I like the idea of having the original covers available for people, and also for me and my own ego, I suppose, because I can't totally get past how much those covers mean to me. So one interesting distinction that came up when I was looking at all of the books that were available, trying to get an idea of which direction to go, was that there is a very clear divide in fantasy romance specifically, and there is a difference between fantasy romance and romantic fantasy. Romantic fantasy being that it's primarily a fantasy adventure, but it includes some romance, and then fantasy romance is a romance story that takes place in a fantasy world. The romance in a fantasy romance is the main focus of the story, so it's really a little bit different from, this is an epic fantasy adventure where also some characters fall in love and that changes some stuff. And if you look at my fantasy romance, Artisan Magic, you'll see that all three of those book covers have people on them, and despite being people covers and not icon or symbol or text-based covers, those continue to be my best-selling books. And I think the reason this works for me is because it really is affected by the niche of fantasy romance, and I have noticed a very clear divide that the spicier a book is, the more likely it is to be a symbol or text-based fantasy romance cover, and the less spicy it is, the more likely it is that it's going to have people on the cover. And even if you're looking in fantasy romance, if you go down specifically into the clean romance section, and I know that's a contentious term and I don't even want to get started on that, that's just what Amazon calls it, so that's what we are calling it. But if you go into the clean romance section, almost all of those books have people on the cover. And, you know, artisan magic fits in that category. There is action and there is violence because, I mean, the hero is an assassin. I don't know how you can get around the killing people part. But as far as the heat level, the books are kisses only. Having the people covers that you see in the clean romance section really helps communicate that and lets it find its readers, because it does fit in with all of the other books that you're going to be seeing in that clean romance, fantasy romance subsection. It's very different in romantic fantasy, where it's probably mostly going to be fade to black because the relationship is not the focal point of the story, but almost all of those don't have people on the covers. So my first goal in changing the covers was trying to make something that would just fit in and either work in the romantic fantasy category or in the epic fantasy category, because I feel it's very strongly both. So I needed it to dovetail in a way that it would communicate a little bit of the romance. I went with a more decorative font that I think the swooshes, you see that a lot more in the more romantic fantasy. I think that does an okay job of communicating it. And of course, whenever I was designing, I would put my cover up next to a little collage of like the top 100, or even just a screenshot of the top 100 all laid out on the screen, so I could put it up next to it and go, okay, does this look like it belongs on this shelf? And it took me a lot of tries to get something that worked. I originally thought that maybe I could try something architectural. I wanted to incorporate some of the elements of the story that are not just another European medieval story, because it's got castles, but it's sure not European because they are on a tropical island in the middle of a bunch of ruins. But no matter how I tried, I could not make that work. And I don't know if it's because it was too light, and overall I feel like a lot of the themes in the story are really dark and heavy, but I just couldn't make it work. So I scrapped that idea, and then I thought, well, what if I go with something that's a little bit more illustrated? So I pulled some graphics from the books. There's icons on the headers of each chapter in the books, and I thought, well, maybe I can take some of those vector graphics that I designed like this for my chapter headers, and I turn them into something for the book covers. So I tried something with that, just doing some things in Illustrator, and very quickly determined that it was not the right way to go with the series either. It just didn't feel right. After that, I sat down with my iPad and I'm like, okay, what feels the most like book one? So I decided to go with the colors of the royal family. Really, the main element of the first book's story is that the only thing Farrell has from her parents is the necklace that is given to court mages. So she is trying to find what the connection is between her parents and the royal family, and what happened to her parents. And I've had a lot of people suggest to me through the years that maybe the first book being this focus on finding out what happened to her family is more of a YA plot, and that has always been so weird to me, because most adoption records don't open in real life until you are an adult. So these people who are actually out in the real world connecting with their birth families, they're not children. But that's a tangent for a different time. Anyway, I sat down with my iPad and I thought, okay, so the colors from her pendant are really the thing that portray the first book's story the best. And I kind of sketched out on my iPad the idea of maybe having an oval frame using the emblem that is the royal family's crest that is on the necklace. And I thought, okay, maybe I can do something with this. So I sat down and started going through stock photo sites, and I found a couple elements that I thought would work. I did a mock-up, and ultimately I really liked it. It was perhaps a little bit too busy, but one of the problems I ran into immediately was that I could not find enough elements in the shapes that I needed to get the cover designs that I needed, because this is a 6-book series and I needed to have enough resources that I could put together 6 covers that looked cohesive but a little bit different from each other. And that just ended up being awful. But I felt like I was going in the right direction at that point. If I put it up next to other covers, it looked like it belonged. It kind of had fantasy vibes. It had romantic fantasy vibes. So I knew that was going to work. And then one of my siblings suggested that I didn't really have anything to draw together the whole symbolism of, the Snakesblood Saga. And they're like, where's your snake? And it's kind of funny because there's actually no snakes. So maybe I didn't name the series particularly well. But I ended up creating a symbol for myself, kind of an Ouroboros, the circle frame. And I figured if I do a circle frame, maybe that will work and I can keep that consistent and maybe one other element consistent. And that was how I ended up with the idea of having the circle of the snake against different backgrounds for the different books. I could keep the symbol of the star in the background, and then the other element that I added in to make it more obviously fantasy was the crowns on the top. And then I just got some different flourishes and things to put around the edges just because it looked really empty without them. So after I got one mock-up that looked pretty good, I thought, maybe this is it. But I figured I would go ahead and do mock-ups for all of the covers just to make sure that I had enough to get everything done, because I wanted to have the crown on each cover be different. And I needed to make sure that I had enough crowns that were similar in style. And I also wanted to make sure that I had enough filigree that I liked. I wanted to have time to work out the colors. And ultimately, this is where we ended up. These are the new covers for the series, and I am hoping that they will be a good fit, but right now it is still too early to tell. I got some feedback from my most trusted readers whenever I was doing the design work, kind of sharing the process along with them, and it was funny seeing all the different iterations of the cover that I went through. I would show to them and they'd go, not quite. So, we were all sort of on the same page. And eventually I showed them this one with the snake circle and the crowns, and everyone was like, yeah, that's the one. So I knew I was onto something there. Everybody agreed that it was something that would make them stop and look at the book if they saw that on the shelf. But whether or not it will affect sales, it's a lot too early for me to tell. Even though the cover changes have gone live through Amazon, it's going to take a few days for everything to catch up, for my author page, all the book covers to change over, and then on the individual book pages as well. Like right now, only 1 out of the 6 has updated, so it's going to be a little bit before I could really start seeing if it makes a difference. And changing them gave me an opportunity to go through and update the categories. I had not changed the categories after Amazon made it so that you can have 3 categories per book instead of just 2. So I went through and made sure that all of them were in the same categories. And maybe that's something I'll reevaluate at some point, because if I kind of squeeze some of them into different categories, maybe they'll show up a little bit better because it'll be a little bit wider of a net, all with the same series. But right now I really just need to evaluate the performance of these covers. After everything updates, maybe in a week or so, that's when I can restart running ads and start sharing on social media that the covers have changed. And then I'll be able to gauge better if these covers are drawing the eye the way that they should. If my symbol-based snake ring cover doesn't take off, then maybe I'll try something that is text-based. Since I do a lot of my own graphic design, I don't have a lot of money invested into this. It took a whole lot of hours, and it took several weeks of trial and error to get a design that I liked. But as far as money goes, for the stock photos, I spent maybe $10 altogether for the 6 covers. But definitely waiting is the hard part, because for all that it took me 6 months to make up my mind, now I really wish that now that the covers are uploaded, it would just instantly be ready to go so that I could start trying to do ads and promos and see if these covers perform better than the old ones did. But at the same time, it feels really good to know that I'm actually taking action steps to try to get my backlist selling better. I know that this series is definitely not everyone's cup of tea, because it's, you know, a large-scale fantasy with a lot of characters, and some people aren't very good with having a large cast with multiple POV characters. But those are the kind of books I grew up reading, so in my head, the series could just never be anything other than that. There are people who will love it, there are people who will adore the tropes that I used, and there are people who are absolutely going to despise it because they hate those elements of story, and that's fine. But the first step is just getting a new cover on it so that the right readers can find it at all, because at least now it looks like it belongs on the fantasy shelf. But that's it for this time. I guess I'll find out in a couple of weeks if that cover change has made any difference for the series. Fingers crossed that it does make a positive impact. If not, then I'll back up and try again, and eventually, when fantasy swings back the other direction and more of the covers are like illustrations and paintings, at least I'll be ready to switch right back. So at this point, you know, there's not really a whole lot to lose. Once I have more information on how it works out, I'll give you an update, but that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.